Hello everybody, Toreno here, and welcome to War Thunder's Le Royale update. This is not the dev server, this is the live server. The Le Royale update has been released. And we're going to take a look at the tanks today. Now, just a quick disclosure, when I look at the ammunition types, the penetration figures I'm going to give are for 500 metres at a 0° angle. So unless I say otherwise, just take that as the standard that I'm going to be using. And we're going to start off with the M4T26, which comes between the M4A376W and the T25 at a battle rating of 6.0. And this is basically an M4 Sherman chassis with an M26 Pershing turret. So of course the M26 Pershing turret has much better armour, but more importantly comes with the 90mm gun, which is much better than the M4A3's 76mm gun. So you've got a T33 APBC shot with a penetration of 160mm, M71 high explosive shell, M313 smoke shell, and of course the M82 APC-BC shell, which has a penetration of 159mm. And that's probably the one people are going to go for, because of course it does have the explosive filler and broadly the same penetration characteristics compared to the T33 shell. And so this represents a good stepping stone from the older Sherman vehicles to the newer vehicles like the T25 and the M26. So you've still got the chassis, which you're no doubt more than familiar with by now in the American tech tree, but you've now got that much better 90mm gun, which you've probably only really seen on the M36 Jackson at this point. In addition to that, you've still got your standard roof-mounted 50 cal and the 7.62mm machine gun in the coaxial position. But like I say, the 90mm gun is the real star of this vehicle. Now, it might struggle against some heavily armoured vehicles like the Panther. I have tried this in test drive. Sometimes I'm able to take out the Panther relatively easily, and then other times it just seems to do what it's doing here. You know, ricocheting, bouncing off, not penetrating in general. But then other times I've tested it and it'll just go through in one shot and completely obliterate it. So it's still going to struggle against some higher tier vehicles, but in the hands of an experienced player or those who are getting used to the 90mm gun, you can definitely do a lot better than with the 76mm Shermans. And so this is a very welcome addition to the American tech tree. And we now move on to the M1 KVT, or Krasnovian variant tank, which is basically an M1 Abrams, but mocked up to look like a Soviet tank. Now, it doesn't look like a Soviet tank at the moment. You have to install the visual modification, which, of course, being a pack vehicle, you will have that unlocked when you get it, but you can turn it on and off. So this is with the modification turned off. It just looks like a regular M1 Abrams, and you have the side skirts here, the composite screens, 65mm thick. For the majority of the front ones, and then the back ones are 6.3mm of RHA armour. And of course it has the same 105mm gun as the M1 Abrams, so you've got a Heat FS shell, 400mm penetration, Hesh with 127mm, the standard APFS DS round with 342mm penetration, the M416 smoke shell, and then your upgraded M774 APFS DS round with 365mm of penetration. And we'll just show off what it looks like in the Soviet style. So as you can see here, you've got these barrels at the back, you've got Soviet writing, or Russian writing to be more precise, fake ERA blocks, you've got a dozer blade, a non-functional infrared searchlight, though you still keep your standard one for the gun, so you can see that here. We're just going to test out the gun. Yeah, there isn't really much difference between this and the M1 Abrams, except no side skirts, so you are technically more vulnerable like this, and these barrels do make it so you can't fire to the rear at diagonals. So, not the worst thing in the world, but in a few edge cases that might cause a few problems, and like I say, without the composite screens you are technically more vulnerable to enemy players. But other than that, it's basically the same as the regular M1 Abrams, so if you're already used to that tank and enjoy playing it, you'll probably be more than at home playing this one as well. Now moving on to the Germans, we've got the Panzer 38T NA, And this is coming on the sort of open-topped tank destroyer line between the SDKFZ 2519 and the SDKFZ 2342. And this is going to be a battle rating 2.3 tank. And the main difference between this and other tanks like the Panzer 38T F and A is that this has welded armour and much better sloped armour. Although you've got this sticky up bit at the top here, which isn't the best thing in the world. And you've got a much more powerful engine. So a top speed of 37 miles per hour stock with a 195 horsepower engine versus the Panzer 38T F, which as you can see here is also a lot less sloped. And fully modded only has a 125 horsepower engine and a top speed of 26.1 miles per hour. Of course, the NA still comes with the standard rounds, so you've got this APC round, which, thank you to people in the comments of the dev server video, basically, this doesn't have any tracer element, so you can't see the shell when it's been fired, which is a bit of a tactical consideration to take into account when choosing which shell you're going to use, and that has a penetration of 45mm. The APCR round has a penetration of 47mm, and then you've got another APC shell, only a penetration of 44mm, but I'm assuming that one comes with the tracer shell. If I just quickly test it out on the Panzer 38T F, yeah, that one has tracer. So nip back to the NA, we just show off its non-tracer round. So here's the Panzer 38T NA, and as you can see, that standard round doesn't have a tracer element, so obviously you can't see where your shell's gone, which makes it harder to correct your aim, but of course enemies can't see where the shell came from, so you are more hidden. And it would be nice to see more shells like that in War Thunder that have less obvious advantages and disadvantages. And yeah, this is just generally a very good improvement to the Panzer 38T-A, and it is a very good side grade to the 38T-F. And of course, because this is a regular vehicle, you don't have to go unlocking through the folders to get to it. And yeah, it also looks a lot newer as well. It doesn't look as grubby as some of the other tanks, which not really a tactical consideration, but something I do like about this vehicle. Now, moving on to the higher tier vehicles for Germany, you've got the Raketenautomat, which comes between the Jagdtiger and the DF-105 at 7.3. And this is a double-barreled vehicle coming to the German tank destroyer lineup. And as you can see here, it carries quite a few effective shells. So you've got a high explosive shell with 33mm penetration and the more powerful heat shell or rocket with 330mm of penetration. Technically, these are grenades, not rockets or shells. And of course, this is lightly armoured because it's based on an APC chassis. In fact, the most heavily armoured part of this vehicle is here at the rear of the vehicle. Basically, it's not going to keep out many shots at all, to be honest. But it does have a very quick reload rate of only 0.5 seconds. And we were told in the dev blog that you can fire all of the shells or grenades in very quick succession. So you can quickly overwhelm enemies just by firing very effective heat shells or grenades at them. So yeah, this is a very good stepping stone from the more slower, heavily armoured vehicles like the Jagdtiger into the more lightly armoured but faster vehicles like the DF-105 and some of the later tank destroyer variants. And now, moving on to the Soviets, we've got the BTR-80A. Of course, in the dev server originally, this was a much lower vehicle. It was around the PT-76B, I believe. I'm trying to remember exactly. But it's now between the Su-100P and the BMP-1 at 7.0. And this is in the sort of light tank armoured personnel carrier part of the tech tree. And as you can see, it does come with a rather effective 30mm gun. Got a high explosive incendiary belt, which has mostly high explosive incendiary shells, but with a little bit of armor piercing tracer, so you've got a max penetration of 53mm with that. Then you've got your majority armor piercing tracer, again the same penetration because you've just got more of the armor piercing tracer shells. And then you've got your APDS belt, which gives you a max penetration of 79mm at 500 meters. In addition to that, you've got a 7.62mm machine gun here next to the main gun in a coaxial position. And it is, of course, very fast. You've got a top speed of 54 miles per hour. But as to be expected from this type of vehicle, it is very lightly armoured. not really exceeding much more than 23mm even at the thickest points, and less than that in most other areas. So this will be a decent vehicle. I'm glad it is in the higher tiers now, because before, like I say, it was sort of in the same bracket as the World War II tanks. So I'm glad that this Cold War vehicle, or late Cold War vehicle, is going to be fighting amongst other Cold War vehicles. Although it's still going to be the very early tier ones, the very early Cold War vehicles, so it's still going to be a little bit out of place. And then we've got the Object 435 at 8.3, between the T10M also at 8.3 and the T64A at 9.0. And this is one of the last Soviet purely armour vehicles. As you can see here, there's no ERA or composite armour. Of course, once you get to the T64A, you start getting composite armour. And this is a tiny bit faster than the T10M at 34 miles per hour compared to that tank, which is only 31 miles per hour. And this also has the same gun as the T62. So you've got the 115mm gun with your 3BM4 APFS DS shell, penetration of 263mm. The 3BM3 APFS DS shell, a penetration of 322mm. So much better than the previous shell. And a Heat FS shell with a penetration of 440mm, the 3BK4. And then your standard high explosive shell. And of course, in addition to that, you've got your 14.5mm machine gun on the roof, and a 7.62mm machine gun in a coaxial position. And the gunner, tank commander and driver do have access to a night vision device, but no thermals, unfortunately. Yeah, this is a very good alternative to the T10M. Like I say, a little bit faster, and you do have the much more effective 115mm gun. Now, moving on to Britain, we didn't get any British tanks as such. We got the SARC Mark IVa, which is the new start of the South African subtree. And of course, this is a South African vehicle. And this has the 40mm 2-pounder gun, which of course is a very effective vehicle at the lower tiers. And of course, this is only battle rating 1.3, so this gun will do its very good stead in this area. And like with other armoured cars, very fast, 52 miles per hour. Only got a crew of 3, which can be a bit of a downside. But obviously not really much different to some of the other armoured cars that South Africa has in that respect. And of course, it does have very thin armour, maxing out at 14mm, or technically 13.7mm. But yeah, this is a very good start to the South African subtree. Other than that, we've got an Indian vehicle, which is based on a British vehicle, or bought off of Britain, the Vijayanta. And this is basically a Vickers Mark I, or at least it started off as a Vickers Mark I. So if we go over to the Vickers Mark I here, yeah, it's got the same hull armour and turret armour, and they do look very visually similar, well, almost identical in many respects. Of course, the Vijayanta has larger side skirts, although they're only structural steel, so they're not going to help that much. And it comes with the M728 APDS round with a penetration of 252mm, a Hess shell with a penetration of 127mm, and the M456 Heat FS shell with a penetration of 400mm. You do get smoke grenades, and you do have a 7.62mm machine gun on the roof here, and then 2 coaxial machine guns. You've got a 12.7mm machine gun, and then next to that you've got a 7.62mm machine gun, and your standard crew of 4, a driver, gunner, commander, and your loader. But also, lastly, the driver does get a night vision device, but no thermals, unfortunately. We'll just take it out to the test drive. Yeah, seems to be decent enough. Quickly destroys that IT-1 over there. Can we get the T62? Yeah, we've got T62. This is using the APDS round. There's that SPAA over there. Test out the machine guns. See, you've got your 2 machine guns there. And yeah, this seems like a decent tank. I mean, I'd hope that we're going to get more Indian vehicles at some point. Like, maybe this is going to be similar to how some other vehicles have worked, where they first start off in a already existing tech tree, and then you start getting more of them later on, or maybe it'll get its own tech tree. Although I'm not entirely familiar with Indian vehicles, I'm not sure which other ones they can get. So yeah, I'm glad this vehicle is in War Thunder, and hopefully we will get some more Indian vehicles at a later date. And moving on to Japan, we only got the one new vehicle, which is the Type 87 RCVP. and that's coming between the Type 60 ATM and the Type 87 RCV, and that's going to be a battle rating of 7.3, which again is much higher than it originally was. It was around the Tier 3 mark originally, and they moved it up, because again, it would have been fighting amongst World War II tanks, which again might damage your immersion, although, you know, that's already a bit of an issue with some vehicles like the R3 in the Italian tech tree. I still think this might struggle a little bit, because if we go to the belts, you've got default belt with HVAP and high explosive fragmentation incendiary tracer shells. That's got a penetration of 37mm. Then you've got your standard high explosive fragmentation incendiary majority belt. And then you've got a HVAP majority belt. And then you've got your very best DM63 APDS belt with a max penetration of 45mm. So even with the best shell, only 45mm at 500 meters, that's going to struggle a little bit against tanks, even against some of the side armor of the more modern tanks. And yeah, it does have a high fire rate of 400 rounds a minute, and I've got a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun, but I do wonder if this is going to struggle a little bit. We'll have to see how it plays out in the game, but obviously, firepower-wise, it does leave a little bit to be desired. And then, of course, very thin armour, a very high top speed of 62 miles per hour, and it's got a crew of 4. A driver, machine gunner in the hull, and a gunner and commander in the turret. And the commander can also fire the main armament. Now, moving on to China, and you've got the Object 211, which is going to come between the M24 and Type 63-1 at 5.0. Of course, the PT-76 is already at 5.0, but that is going to be disappearing after June the 27th. So if you haven't already and you want to get this vehicle, if you can, believe if you get even 1 point into that vehicle, it will basically remain forever. I believe that's how it works with the Maus and some of the other German vehicles that were removed. So you've got 2 weeks to try and get to that vehicle and just put a few points into it, and then you can move on to something else if you so desire. But looking at the Object 211, it has an 85mm gun and a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun, which I'm struggling to locate. There it is. And it has an APHE BC shell with a penetration of 124mm, high explosive shell, and then an APC BC shell with 154mm of penetration. And that has a smaller explosive content, 67.7 grams versus 164 grams for the stock shell, but of course you do get much better armor penetration, to make up for that. It's got a crew of 3, so your gunner and loader in the turret, and your driver in the hull. And like with the PT-76, it should be amphibious. It has got the covers over the propellers here, and it has a top speed of 40 miles per hour. And like I say, very lightly armoured, not going to do well in a stand-up fight. And it doesn't have smoke grenades, but it has this smoke screen thing like with the PT-76B. So I think this will be a good replacement for the PT-76. Of course, unlike the PT-76, it doesn't get the heat shell, which has a penetration of 200mm on that vehicle. So it might struggle a little bit in that regards, but its APC-BC shell, the upgraded one, 154mm, so it's not too far off of the Heat FS shell in regards to penetration characteristics, so I think it will still do decently enough. Then moving on, we've got the ZTZ-88B, and that's coming between the ZTZ-59D1 and the ZTZ-88A. And all 3 of those vehicles are 8.7, so you've got a good choice between those 3 vehicles. Like I mentioned on my video in the dev server, this does have the composite armour on the whole front. If we go to the vehicle before that, that only has the ERA blocks on top of the whole front, though it does also have them around the turret as well. So in regards to protection, the 88B is a bit of a side grade. I mean, like I say, they're all 8.7 vehicles, so in theory they're all kind of a side grade in some ways. Of course, the 88B has a faster reload rate than the D1, and a little bit faster than the 88A, so 9.3 versus 9.7 seconds reload rate. And it fires your standard heat shell with 400mm of penetration, a hair shell with 127mm penetration, and your top tier APFS DS round with a penetration of 330mm. You've got smoke grenades that can be fitted, And you've got your 12.7mm machine gun on the roof there, and your 7.62mm machine gun in the coaxial position. And you've got a gunner, loader, and commander in the turret, while the driver is within the hull. And the gunner, tank commander, and driver do have access to night vision devices, which is somewhat handy, though, of course, having the thermal devices would be better. And it's got a top speed of 36 miles per hour. So faster than the D1 and the same as the 88A. And yeah, I think this is a very good addition to the Chinese tech tree. I've only just started really going down the Chinese tech tree, but these sorts of vehicles I think will be very fun once I actually do get a little bit further down the Chinese tech tree. And so yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to getting to this vehicle. Now moving on to Italy, we have the rather impressive Freccia, and this comes with the Spike missiles. I believe this is the first regular vehicle with a fire and forget missile system. So you can see there it's got a tandem warhead, so you can get through ERA armour, and it's got a max penetration of 700mm at a 0-degree angle. And it's got a lock range of 20 kilometres, it's got a missile guidance time of 35 seconds. The max speed is maybe a little bit on the slower side at 180 metres a second, so enemies can spot that, but of course, what exactly can they do to get away from it? And of course, in addition to that, you've got your 25mm Orlikon cannon. So you've got your default shells with a penetration of 73mm, with a mix of APDS and high explosive incendiary tracer. Then you've got your pure high explosive incendiary tracer, your pure APDS belt, again with 73mm penetration. And then you've got an APFS DS round with a penetration of 83mm. And of course, you've got a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun. Oh, you've also got your 7.62mm machine gun on the roof here. But with regards to the armament, at least, this is a very well-armed vehicle. And like I say, this is going to be a top-tier Italian vehicle, so it's 10.0 vehicle. And of course, the armour isn't the best in the world, but they do make the best out of what they've got. So you've got high hardness armour at the front here, so that's got a 1.2 multiplier. You've got your composite screen, which provides a good multiplier against heat shells, and behind that you've got the high hardness rolled armour again. And of course, to provide additional protection from the front, you've got your radiator and your engine. So if you get a shot from the front, there is a good chance that it'll be absorbed by these. Or conversely, it might just provide additional spalling, but you have to see how that turns out in battle, I suppose. Then crew-wise, you've got a driver in the hull, and then you've got your commander who can fire the main armament, and the gunner in the turret. And this is a very speedy vehicle, so 67 miles per hour top speed. And while the driver only has access to a night vision device, the gunner does have access to thermals, which of course is very useful for these types of vehicles. So yeah, I think the Freccia is going to be a very good addition to the Italian tech tree, and it's nice to see that such a great vehicle is coming to the Italian tech tree, and Italy's going to be the first tech tree to have a regular vehicle with fire and forget missiles. Now moving on from Italy, we've got the AUF-1, which is well, technically it says tank destroyer, but this is more of a self-propelled artillery vehicle between the ELC BIS and the AMX-50 Foch at 7.0. This is a rather large, beefy vehicle. I mean, it looks like a house from the front. And as you can expect, armour is not particularly great. And with all those shells at the back, if you take a shot from the rear, you're just going to explode into a billion pieces. But of course, you do have the 155mm howitzer, which is an auto-loaded howitzer, so only a reload rate of 7.5 seconds. You've also got a 12.7mm machine gun on the roof here for against enemy aircraft. And you can fire a mix of smoke shells, high explosive shells with a penetration of 54mm, and the HEVT shell, only a penetration of 61mm. But of course, if you can get that to explode above the roof of an enemy vehicle, that could cause quite a few problems for them. And you can fit smoke grenades as well, which will help with survivability, although trying to hide that even amongst a smoke screen might not be the easiest thing in the world. And speed is pretty decent for such a big vehicle at 40 miles per hour. And also very helpfully, it has the same top speed backwards as well as forwards. So like I say, 40 miles per hour backwards and forwards. So very good for getting out of tricky situations. And you've got a crew of 4. So you've got your driver in the hull, and your loader, gunner, and commander in the turret. And the commander can also take over the main armament if required. Then moving on, we have the VBCI-2 MCT-30, which is available for 8,910 Golden Eagles. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't come with any missiles, so you've only got your 30mm Bushmaster 2 Mark 44, and you've got your default belt, which is APDS and High Explosive Incendiary Tracer, penetration of 81mm, High Explosive Incendiary Tracer only belt, and then your APFS-DS only belt with a penetration of 110mm. So at 9.0, that's going to be decently effective against the sides of enemy vehicles. And the gunner and tank commander both have thermal vision devices, while the driver unfortunately only gets night vision devices. Oh yeah, you can see on the VBCI-2, it's now got a zoom of 14.7, which is very good indeed, as well as a bunch of other options like track IRST and BVR mode, ACM mode, etc, etc. And again, like with the Freccia, you've got quite a lot of things at the front here. So you've got your engine and your transmission and the radiator and the fuel tank, or exterior fuel tank, which helps to keep out enemy shells from the front. And this has a mix of aluminium alloy and high hardness rolled armour, at least at the front. And also on the sides as well. And although it looks like you've got a decent amount of it, it does have a bad multiplier, so this doesn't actually provide 35mm of armour against other enemy vehicles. Although, as you can see here, if we try and fire our own APDS shell, this would protect against it. So, even though the armour could be better, it is very effective. Although, once you get to the APFS-DS rounds, yeah, they go straight through. But, you know, the fuel tank has blocked most of that shell. We fire from this side. Again, it seems like, while it still got through and did some damage, some of it was absorbed by the engine and the transmission. This has a very good top speed of 62 miles per hour. And of course, it has a crew of 3. So you've got your gunner and commander in the turret area, and the commander can also fire the main armament, and you've got your driver as well at the front of the vehicle. Just take this out quickly, and we've got the commander view. You can fire from the commander view as well. And just switch to thermal for the commander. Then we go to the gunner, switch him to thermal as well. And I don't know if it's just me, but it looks like it does zoom in a lot more than it did on the dev server variant. I believe this did have a few changes, so that may be the case why it, you know, seems to be forming a little bit differently to how I remember. And there you can see that it doesn't have too much trouble penetrating from the sides of enemy vehicles. Although from the front, yeah, you do struggle a little bit. Here we can take out this T-62 at least. And of course you do have a scout UAV, which we could use, but I'm not going to at the moment because we all know how they work. You've got your smoke grenades that don't really fire that far in front, so not really good for laying down smoke in advance of where you're going. But yeah, this seems like a very decent French vehicle. And my only disappointment is that this hasn't been added to the regular tech tree. Hopefully we will see another variant of this vehicle added to the regular tech tree, because it is a very effective vehicle, and it would be nice for France to actually start getting vehicles like this in its tech tree. I don't think it even has any IFVs or APCs in the higher tiers. No, it's all AMX 13s and 30s. We've got the Mephisto, which is probably the only one that really fits the bill, other than some of the SPAA vehicles. So yeah, hopefully this is just a test before we get other VBCI-2 variants. Oh, we've also got the AMX 10 RC, but of course that does seem more of a light tank than the VBCI-2. Now moving on to Sweden, we've got the Sherman III 4, which is available for 1,300 Golden Eagles. And like I mentioned in my dev server video about this, this is a bit of a hodgepodge vehicle. It's a later Sherman with a 75mm gun, and I'm not sure if Sweden ever actually had this. So I'm not sure why this is in the Swedish tech tree. You can see here the machine gun position in the bow has been plated over, but the machine gunner himself still remains. So you've still got a 5-man crew, so you've got your machine gunner, driver, loader, commander, and gunner. And you've got your standard 75mm gun with a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun. So you've got your AP shell, 78mm penetration, high explosive shell, 10mm, M61 APC BC shell, 90mm penetration, and the smoke shell, which, just creates smoke. It's got broadly the same top speed as some of the other Shermans, so 26 miles per hour, so, it's broadly the same as the other Shermans. Yeah, the M4A1, 7623.6, M4A2W, 28.5. It's a good ballpark around those numbers, at least. And, yeah, this basically performs like a regular Sherman. Of course, we are missing the roof-mounted machine gun, so this does perform worse in the anti-air role, but, of course, that isn't really this thing's job. And it does look very weird. It looks like the turret is very small compared to the hull. And as someone pointed out, I don't think America actually has any vehicles like this, the later models with the 75mm gun, so kind of weird that Sweden got it before the Americans. But I'll have to do more research into how these vehicles worked, probably when I do my next episode on American tanks I'd like to see added to War Thunder. And yeah, this is a decent vehicle. At 3.7, this does mean Sweden has a very good 3.7 lineup now. And it's got a very good mix of Soviet, Finnish, and German vehicles that you can choose from when building up your Swedish lineup. So, yeah, a very good addition for Sweden. And, yeah, Sweden is increasingly looking like one of the more well-rounded nations of War Thunder, with access to lots of very good vehicles. And then moving on, we've got a Finnish vehicle, the CV9030 Finn, between the IKV 91105 and the 9040B. And this is a 9.0 vehicle. So you've got your 30mm Bushmaster 2 Mark 44 cannon. You've got your default shells with APDS and high explosive incendiary tracer, penetration of 81mm, high explosive incendiary tracer only belt, and then the APFS DS belt with 110mm of penetration. And the gunner and commander have access to thermals, the driver has access to night vision device, you can get smoke grenades, and you have access to a 7.62mm machine gun. And the armour is not going to be the best in the world, but with most IFVs, they're not really going to, protect against modern tanks anyway, so all you really need to do is be able to protect against other IFVs and smaller caliber weapons. And in that, it'll probably do a decent enough job. You've got some composite screens at the front, which again helps against heat shells, and also on the sides. So heat shell vehicles may struggle a little bit against this, although again, once you get to the higher tiers, they are going to have hundreds of millimeters of penetration, so unless it's a very bad angle, they're still going to penetrate. And like with some of the other vehicles, you've got your transmission and engine at the front, which helps protect against shells from the front. And then you've got your driver in the hull, and the commander and gunner in the turret. Now lastly, we move on to the Israeli tech tree, and we've only got two vehicles here. You've got the Magach Hydra. Basically all the vehicles that Israel get are Magachs, which seems to be all they get nowadays. But you've got the Magach Hydra, which is basically a regular Magach, but with a whole bunch of rockets. And this is folded with the 6R. And of course, as you can see on the 6R, that has ERA blocks. The Hydra is missing those, so obviously a very bad point to this vehicle. And the Hydras themselves are pretty decently okay. They've got a penetration of 290mm with the heat shell, or heat grenade. And you've got your standard shells for the 105mm gun. You've got heat FS, 400mm penetration, HESH, 127mm, and the APFSDS shell, 330mm penetration, as well as a smoke shell. And you've also got two 7.62mm machine guns on the roof, and one in a coaxial position. So other than that, this is basically a Magach 6R, but yeah, you've got rockets and no ERA, which yeah, so like I say, this is a bit of a side grade, and it's 8.3, so it is technically the same battle rating as the Magach 6R. So it seems like they're not really expecting you to do massively better or worse. Should also be pointed out that while this does carry 38 shells or grenades, it does have a reload rate of 39 seconds. So Obviously, you're going to want to make sure you're in a secure area if you're going to be reloading these, although, of course, you can still rely on your regular 105mm gun. And now, lastly, we have the Magach 6B Gale, which is at 9.0. So you can see we've got explosive reactive armour, and we've got the 105mm gun. So again, Heat FS 400mm penetration, HESH 127mm, M11 APFS DS round 330mm, smoke shell, and in addition we have the M426 fully upgraded APFS DS shell with 420mm penetration. And the gunner gets access to a thermal vision device while the tank commander and driver have to make do with night vision. So you do get a laser warning system and laser rangefinder, and you can get smoke grenades fitted. The armour, you got a maximum armour of, if we take off the external armour, you got 108mm for the upper whole front plate, and it's variable around the turret, but see here, it seems to be 300mm here. We did have 200mm at one point. On the actual mantlet itself, it's not the best in the world. It says only like, oh, we got 300mm there, and then it's less at other points, but presumably it will catch on some of the armour behind that and on the gun itself. You got more ERA around the turret. Top speed of 33 miles per hour, and you have a driver, gunner, commander, and loader, and the commander can fire the main armament as well. Right, so finally having got through all of those tanks, yeah, this is shaping up to be a very tank-heavy update. Technically, it's probably going to be more of a naval-heavy update just because of the addition of the French naval tech tree. But of course, that is closed beta testing at the moment. So most people are not going to be able to, have access to them. So for most people, they're going to be able to have access to the tanks. So yeah, this is a very good update for tanks. Good to see that Gaijin have filled out some of the lower tiers, as well as filling out some gaps in battle ratings. I did notice in the dev server it does seem to be filling in a lot of gaps between various vehicles with regards to battle ratings, which, yeah, helps to make there be less of a jump between the battle ratings and maybe helps with making more balanced lineups. Anyway, this is just a very quick whistle-stop tour looking at the tanks of the Le Royale update. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you'll join me for the next episode. I've been Toreno, and I'll see you next time.